Thrown out at 19, she built a hidden cabin inside a waterfall and saved her grandmother from flood. The mud felt alive under Claraara's boots. Each step pulled at her like the earth itself wanted to keep her there, cold and sinking and cruel. Rain poured from the gray November sky in heavy sheets, soaking her dress, her shawl, and the little burlap sack hanging from her shoulder. Her hair clung to her cheeks and forehead. Beside her, her grandmother Maeve stumbled again, coughing hard into the crook of her arm, her thin body shaking from cold and weakness. Claraara tightened her grip around the old woman's waist and kept moving. They had almost nothing. One blanket, a small axe, a tinder box, a heel of stale bread, a tin pot. That was all that remained after a life on the farm where Claraara had been born and raised. Behind them, yea, far back through the rain and bare trees, stood the house that had once been home. The sound of the door slamming still rang in Claraara's ears. "We have no room for idlers and dreamers." Her stepmother Agnes had spoken the words with a dry, cutting calm that hurt worse than shouting. Her father had been dead a year now, and with him had gone the only voice in that house that had ever defended Claraara's curious hands and restless mind. Agnes hated the way Claraara could look at a broken latch and improve it. She hated the way she sketched little plans in the dirt instead of simply obeying. She hated that Maeve encouraged her. "You read instead of working," Agnes had said. "You tinker instead of doing what matters, and your grandmother fills your head with foolishness. Go be clever somewhere else." So they had been turned out. And a girl of 19 and an old woman with a bad cough pushed into the rain with winter coming down hard over the hills. Claraara swallowed the hot ache in her throat. Anger would not warm Maeve's hands. Anger would not build a roof. The trail ahead had become a slick line of clay and stone. Dark woods crowded close on both sides. Wind hissed through naked branches. The rain turned colder by the minute, and before long it changed into hard, stinging sleet that struck their faces and hands like thrown gravel. Maeve nearly fell. Claraara caught her just in time. "Just a little farther," she whispered, though she had no idea where farther even was. Maeve's breath rattled in her chest. Her face had gone pale beneath the wet strands of white hair stuck to her skin. Claraara pulled the wool blanket from the sack and wrapped it around her grandmother's shoulders, even though it meant she would have none herself. The cold pushed deeper now, past skin and muscle, down into bone. Claraara knew that kind of cold. It made people quiet. It made them lie down. It made them never get up again. Then, through the storm and fear, a memory rose. She saw her father smiling on a warm summer day years ago, leading her up along the creek to a high waterfall hidden among granite ledges and pine. She remembered the sound most of all. Not the crash of the water, but something strange beneath it. "Listen close," he had told her. "Hear that? It sounds hollow behind the falls." At the time she had only laughed and splashed at the creek edge, but now that old memory lit inside her mind like a match in darkness. About a hollow place behind the water. It might be nothing. It might be just a child's memory twisted by fear, but it was all she had. She shifted more of Maeve's weight onto her shoulder and turned toward the growing sound ahead. At first it was only a low murmur under the rain, then it became a steady roar, then a thunder that seemed to shake the ground itself. They reached the creek at dusk. Claraara stopped cold. The gentle stream from memory was gone. In its place raged a swollen brown torrent, violent and fast, carrying branches and torn brush in its current. Ahead, water crashed over the granite ledge in a wide white curtain, sending up clouds of icy mist. Maeve sagged against her. "Clara, child," she said weakly, "we can't." But Claraara stared through the spray. There, near the base of the falls, she saw something strange. A shadow. A slight inward bend where the water did not fall flat against stone. A place where the rock seemed cut back. Her father had been right. "Hollow," she whispered. She looked at Maeve, at the trembling hands and blue lips and eyes dim with exhaustion. "We have to." Step by step, she guided her grandmother across the slick rocks near the cliff. Spray drenched them completely. The noise was so loud it swallowed thought. Claraara found one handhold, then another, pressing her body against the wet stone as she edged sideways. The waterfall was inches away now, white and furious. Her heart hammered in her chest. Then she pulled in a breath and pushed through. Yet for one terrible second there was only freezing pressure, blinding water, and roaring chaos. Then she stumbled out the other side. Dry stone met her boots. Claraara gasped and spun around, reaching back through the curtain of water. Her fingers caught Maeve's wrist. She pulled with everything left in her body, and a moment later her grandmother came through too, shaking and coughing, but alive. They stood together on a wide stone ledge inside a hidden cavern. The change was so sudden it felt unreal. The roar of the waterfall still filled the air, but it was softer here, distant now, like thunder outside a thick wall. The wind was gone, the sleet was gone. Green-gray light filtered through the sheet of falling water, casting strange moving shadows across the stone walls. The cave stretched far back into darkness, deep and high and dry beneath the rock. Claraara sank to her knees. For the first time since Agnes had driven them out, she felt something other than fear. Shelter. Maeve lowered herself beside her, shaking under the wet blanket. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They were too cold, too tired, too close to the edge of breaking. At last, Maeve touched Claraara's arm and said in a raw whisper, "Fire, child, before the damp settles in." Claraara nodded and forced herself to stand. The cave was bigger than she had first thought. It ran deep into the rock, and the farther back she went, the drier it became. She searched with numb hands and found old driftwood lodged in cracks, dry moss, and brittle twigs preserved by the shelter of stone. High above, near the ceiling, and she noticed a narrow black crack where a faint draft pulled upward. A chimney. Her breath caught. Maybe this was not only a place to survive one night, maybe this could be the place where they lived. She returned to Maeve with an armful of dry scraps and knelt by a ring of stones near the cave wall. Her fingers shook badly as she struck steel to flint. Sparks jumped and died. Again, again, again. At last one spark caught in the moss, a tiny orange glow. Claraara bent close and breathed gently. The ember brightened. A thread of smoke rose. Then came the small flicker of flame. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The flame shook at first like it might lose courage and die. Then it caught hold of the twigs, climbed into the dry wood, and became a small, steady fire. Warm light spread over the stone floor. Maeve moved closer with a long breath that sounded almost like relief. Claraara fed the fire carefully, one thin stick at a time. Smoke lifted toward the crack high above and slipped out into the dark. When she saw that, hope rose so sharply inside her it almost hurt. This place could breathe. It could hold a fire. It could keep them alive. That first night they stayed close to the flames and shared the stale bread in silence. Outside, the storm battered the waterfall, but inside the cave there was only the crackle of pine and the low, distant thunder of water. Claraara did not sleep much. Each time her eyes closed, she saw Agnes's face, the shut door, the muddy road. But every time she opened them again, she saw the fire still burning and Maeve still breathing. That was enough to get through the dark. Morning brought a cold green light through the curtain of falling water. Claraara's clothes were stiff with damp, and every part of her body ached. Still, she stood and began to work. Maeve had always said that fear grew bigger when hands stayed idle. The first days were full of hard, plain tasks. Claraara searched the cave, found more dry wood wedged deep in cracks, and stacked it near the fire. She used the axe to cut fallen branches from the trees just outside the spray. She hauled stones into a neat ring around the fire pit and swept the sleeping place clean with a pine bough. Maeve, wrapped in the blanket, sat near the warmth and watched with sharp old eyes. "You must get up off this stone at night," she said. "The ground steals heat faster than wind." So Claraara dragged in branches and laid them thick across one corner of the cave floor. Over those she spread pine needles, dry moss, and the blanket. It was rough and uneven, but it lifted them off the freezing rock. That alone made the second night easier than the first. Food was the next problem. The stale bread was gone by noon. Claraara followed the creek edge and dug up bitter roots Maeve showed her, stringy things hidden under wet soil. She found a patch of winter berries clinging to thorny brush and gathered them with numb fingers. They boiled the roots in the tin pot over the fire until the cave filled with a sharp, earthy smell. It was not a meal anyone would welcome in better times. But it quieted the hunger enough for another day. Days passed, then more. The rain eased, but the cold grew harder as winter set its jaw across the hills. Claraara learned the shape of the land around the waterfall. She found where fallen pine gathered on a slope above the creek. She found flat stones good for lining the fire pit, She found a shallow place behind the cave where old floodwood had dried for years untouched, and all the while a thought was taking shape inside her mind. The cave was shelter, yes, but it was too large and too damp to keep warm through deep winter. Fire made one small pocket of comfort, then the heat vanished upward into the huge dark space above. They needed something smaller inside it, a room within the cave, a box inside a box. One evening she drew the idea with a stick and a patch of ash near the fire. Maeve leaned forward and studied it. 4 walls, a narrow door, a raised bed inside. "A cabin in the cave," she said softly. Claraara nodded. "The cave keeps out the storm. The cabin keeps in the heat." Maeve's tired face changed then. For the first time in weeks, Claraara saw not only survival in her grandmother's eyes, but interest, pride. "Your father would have smiled at that," she said. "Now, make it stand." The next morning, Claraara began. She searched for smaller logs first, ones she could drag alone. Winter storms had knocked down enough pine and oak to provide what she needed if she was willing to fight for every inch of it. And she fought. She cut branches away with the axe until her palms split. She rolled the logs onto smaller poles and pushed them like a slow-moving burden through mud and dead leaves. Many times one slipped and pinned her leg or slid backward down a slope she had nearly conquered. Once she sank to her knees and cried in pure anger and exhaustion, her tears hot against her freezing cheeks. Then she thought of Maeve inside the cave, coughing in the cold, and stood again. By sunset she had hauled back the first 2 logs. Maeve became her teacher. Though weak in body, she was strong in memory. She showed Claraara how corners had to lock together. With a twig, she drew the shape of a notch in the dirt, explaining how one log should cradle the next so the wall would not shift. Claraara tried. Her first cuts were ugly. The log rocked badly when she set it down. She swore under her breath, pulled it back, and cut again. The second try was better. The third held. That night, by firelight, the first side of the little cabin lay half-formed on the cave floor. Only a line of logs, really, but to Claraara it looked as grand as any church. The work became their life. Wake, stoke the fire, gather wood, dig roots, haul logs, cut notches, seal cracks with moss and clay, sleep, wake again. Slowly the walls rose. Claraara mixed creek clay with dry grass and mud and pressed it into every gap between the logs. She packed moss over that and smoothed it tight with her hands. She built the cabin small on purpose, just big enough for 2 narrow beds and a little room to sit. She wanted no wasted space, no place for warmth to run and disappear. The door was the hardest part. She had no hinges, no iron, no nails worth speaking of. So she shaped a thick slab of split pine, tied it with leather strips cut from an old harness strap Maeve had saved in the sack, and fitted it to swing on wooden pegs. It was rough, heavy, and uneven, but it opened and closed. When she hung it in place, Maeve laughed. The sound startled Claraara. She had not heard her grandmother laugh since the farm. "Well," Maeve said, "it may not impress rich folks, but it will keep poor ones alive." Inside the cabin, Claraara built a raised sleeping platform from straight poles lashed together with bark strips. She piled it with pine boughs, dry grass, and the blanket. She made 2 stools from chopped rounds of oak and a little table from split boards. About near the doorway, she shaped a stone hearth outside the wall, so heat would move inward while smoke still climbed toward the cave's natural crack above. Then one day, while digging along the creek bank for roots, her stick struck something smooth and heavy below the soil. Claraara knelt and pulled up a handful of dense gray earth. It was soft when wet, but held together in her hand. She carried it back to the cave. Maeve's eyes brightened at once. "Clay," she said. "Good clay." Over the next week, Claraara learned another kind of building. Under Maeve's careful words, her strong hands shaped bowls, cups, and a deeper pot. She rolled the clay into coils and pressed them together, smoothing the walls with wet fingers until each piece held its shape. They let them dry near the fire, and then set them in the hottest coals and prayed they would not crack. Some did, some broke clean in half, but a few came through hard and red and strong. When Claraara lifted the first finished bowl from the ashes, she stared at it for a long time. It was simple and uneven, but it was theirs. Made from creek bank and fire and patience. something useful born from nothing. That night they ate boiled roots from the new clay bowl while snow fell beyond the waterfall. The little cabin held warmth better than she had dared hope. The cave still breathed cold around them, but inside the log walls, with the door shut and the fire steady outside, the air stayed gentler. Maeve's cough eased, her cheeks regained a little color. In some evenings, she even sat at the rough table and sorted dried berries while Claraara repaired tools or trimmed wood pegs by firelight. As winter deepened, the hidden place behind the waterfall stopped feeling like a refuge stolen from death and began to feel like something else. Home. Yet Claraara knew home could vanish if they had no trade, no salt, no flour, no way to get what the woods alone would not give. That thought stayed with her until late one afternoon when she noticed a line of smoke far down the valley. Not from a chimney, she knew, but from a moving campfire. A day later, she heard the faint jingle of harness bells and saw a man leading a pack mule along the far bank of the creek. He was lean, weathered, and quiet even from a distance. A trader, likely moving between scattered farms in the town beyond the ridge. Claraara ducked behind the brush, but not before he glanced her way. He did not shout. He did not follow. He simply kept walking, though the look he gave the woods told her he had seen enough to know someone was there. That night, Claraara sat by the fire, turning one of her clay bowls in her hands. Outside, the waterfall roared on, hiding them from the whole world. For the first time since being cast out, she wondered if hiding was enough. By the next morning, Claraara had made up her mind. Hiding had saved them, but hiding alone would not carry them through every season. Salt ran out, flour ran out, the axe blade would one day dull beyond what a stone could fix. They needed a way to trade. So she chose 3 of her best clay pieces, 1 deep pot and 2 strong bowls, and carried them down to a flat rock beside the trail where she had seen the trader pass. She set them there carefully, then stepped back into the trees and waited. The man came near midday with his mule. He stopped the moment he saw the pottery. For a long minute he said nothing. He picked up the bowl, turned it in his rough hands, ran his thumb along the rim, then looked slowly toward the woods where Claraara stood hidden. He didn't call out. Instead, he reached into one of his packs and placed a small sack on the rock. Then he took the pottery, tied it carefully to the mule, and walked on. Claraara waited until he was gone before stepping out. Inside the sack was salt, a small amount, but enough to make her heart pound. Beneath it lay a handful of dried beans. That evening, Maeve smiled over the little pile spread on the table inside the cabin. "Fair trade," she said, "and a fair man by the look of it." The silent exchange continued. Every few days, Claraara left bowls, cups, or tightly woven baskets she made from creek reeds. In return, the trader left flour, a bit of lard, a sharpening stone, and once even a spool of coarse thread. By spring, she knew his name was Finn. He was not a man for many words, but he was steady, and steady was worth more than charm in the wild. One afternoon, she met him openly on the trail. "You made all these?" he asked, nodding toward the stack of pottery. Claraara nodded. He looked past her toward the roar of the waterfall, though the cave itself stayed hidden from sight. "You live up there?" It was not a question. "Yes." He studied her for a moment, then said only, "You have a good hand." From Finn, Claraara got more than supplies. She got seeds, corn kernels, bean seeds, 2 wrinkled potatoes meant for planting, not eating. Later, after weeks of trade, she gave him nearly everything she had finished that month in exchange for 2 old hens that still laid. She carried them home in a sling against her side, listening to their annoyed clucking all the way up the trail. Maeve laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Now we are truly grand people," she said. "A hidden cabin, clay dishes, and chickens behind a waterfall." Claraara smiled, but her mind was already on the next task. There was a narrow ledge just outside the cave mouth, sheltered from the worst wind and kissed by good daylight. It was rocky and uneven, hardly a place any sensible person would call a garden. And so Claraara made it one. Bucket by bucket, she hauled dark forest soil up from the woods below. She built low stone walls to hold it in place. She broke the earth with a sharpened stick and planted the bean seeds, the corn, and the potatoes with more hope than certainty. The hens got a little coop against the warm backside of the cabin, safe from foxes and rain. Their eggs became a treasure that changed everything. Spring softened the valley, then summer came. The garden lived, the beans climbed, the corn rose high, the potatoes filled the soil under their leaves. The hens scratched and muttered and laid eggs with faithful regularity. Claraara added shelves inside the cave for drying roots and hanging herbs. She shaped larger pots for storage. She built a proper rain catch with hollowed wood to guide clean water into clay jars. Maeve, stronger now than she had been in years, kept the garden and the chickens while Claraara cut wood, improved the walls, and checked snare lines in the woods. The girl who had once been shoved from her father's house was changing. Her hands grew rough and powerful. Her shoulders broadened. Her face, once soft with youth, sharpened under sun and work. But something else changed too. The fear that had followed her into the rain that first night slowly gave way to something deeper and steadier. She no longer looked at the land as an enemy. She understood it now. She could read the creek, the slope of soil, the smell of a coming storm, the way smoke moved, the way wood settled, the way water always searched for weakness. By autumn, at the cave behind the waterfall no longer felt hidden from life. It felt placed exactly where life had found them. Finn still visited when his route brought him near. By then he would sit a while by the fire and share news of the settlement below. That was how Claraara heard that the valley had suffered a hard summer. Too hot, too dry. Crops were poor. The creek had run low. Families were worried about winter. Claraara listened while shelling dried beans into a bowl. Their own stores were good. Not rich, but good. Rows of clay pots lined the shelves with dried beans, corn, herbs, and berries. Potatoes sat packed in cool earth at the back of the cave. Smoked strips of venison hung from a beam. They had enough. She should have felt only relief. Instead, she felt unsettled. Yeah, the same people who had watched her and Maeve leave in the rain were now facing hunger. She did not pity Agnes. Not yet. The hurt was too old and too sharp for that. But she could not help thinking of the children in the settlement, of old men and tired mothers, of people who perhaps had been weak when they should have been brave. Then the sky broke. The drought ended in violence. Rain came down in great endless sheets, pounding the valley day and night. The dry ground could not drink it fast enough. The low creek became a racing brown flood. Tree trunks spun through the current. Whole banks collapsed into the water. The waterfall, once beautiful and steady, became a raging wall whose roar shook the cave itself. From their high ledge, Claraara and Maeve were safe. From that same ledge they watched the valley drown. Yet the lower woods vanished first. Then the trail Finn used disappeared under muddy water. Then fences, sheds, and patches of field sank beneath the flood. For 3 days and nights the rain did not stop. On the 4th day, Claraara saw movement on the far ridge. A man was waving. She stepped closer to the edge and narrowed her eyes through the mist. "Finn," he shouted, but the storm swallowed his voice. He pointed down toward the valley, then made motions with his hands. A roof, rising water, people gathered high, empty mouths. Claraara understood at once. The settlement had flooded. Families were stranded on scraps of higher ground. Their food stores were gone. For a long moment she stood still. Memory hit her hard. Agnes's cold eyes, the slammed door, the rain on Maeve's face, the long night walk through mud and sleet. Found something bitter rose in her chest and whispered, "Let them learn what it feels like." Then Maeve came to stand beside her. Her grandmother said nothing at first. She only looked out at Finn, at the drowning valley, at the storm that cared nothing for old wounds. Then she placed a gentle hand on Claraara's arm. "When you have enough," she said quietly, "you do not build a higher wall, you build a longer table." Claraara closed her eyes. The anger was still there. The hurt was still there. But beneath it stood something larger, something the cave and the year of labor had built inside her. She had not survived all this to become cruel. She opened her eyes and gave Finn a sharp nod across the gorge. Then she turned and began to work. The creek below was impossible to cross, but Claraara's mind moved quickly now. Near the ledge stood a tall pine rooted in stone. Across the gorge, another strong tree leaned over the high ground where Finn waited. Claraara cut a younger trunk, stripped it fast, tied a stone to the end of her longest rope, and after several throws managed to send it over a branch on the far side. Finn caught on and secured it. Soon a taut guide rope stretched across the raging gap. It was not safe. It only needed to be possible. Claraara and Maeve packed sacks with potatoes, dried corn, smoked meat, eggs cushioned in moss, and jars of beans. A painful amount of their winter stores went into those bags, a full year of labor. Claraara looked at the stacked food, then at Maeve. Maeve simply nodded. The first sack slid across the rope to Finn, then the second. Then Claraara herself gripped the line and pulled hand over hand across the flood, boots swinging over the roaring water below. When she reached the other side, Finn stared at her with open disbelief. "I knew you had stores," he said, breathless. "I didn't know you had this much." "There is more," she answered. Together they carried the food down toward the remains of the settlement. The sight below was worse than Claraara had imagined. Families huddled on a muddy rise with blankets over their heads. Children cried from hunger and cold. Men stood uselessly staring at the water where their fields had been. The proud little valley that had once judged her now looked broken and small. And there was Agnes. Her dress was soaked and torn, mud streaked her face. The hard pride she had worn like armor was gone. She looked at Claraara as if she had seen a ghost step out of the storm. Claraara felt no triumph, only a tired sadness. She set down the first sack, opened it, and began handing out food. Potatoes to the children first, then beans, then strips of smoked meat. She worked with calm, quick hands, saying little. No speech, no accusation, no reminder of what had been done to her. The silence did more than any sharp words could have done. In the days that followed, Claraara's hidden home became the valley's lifeline. With Finn's help, she moved food again and again from the cave to the stranded families. She showed them where to dig safe routes on higher ground. She showed them how to brace temporary shelters against wind and runoff. She helped them survive the very kind of disaster they had never believed she could understand. Agnes came to the waterfall after the flood had begun to fall away. She stood outside the veil of water and called Claraara's name in a voice that sounded smaller than Claraara had ever heard it. Claraara stepped out from behind the curtain and faced her. Agnes kept her eyes low. "You saved us," she said. "People were hungry," Claraara answered. Agnes swallowed hard. "I was wrong." The words seemed to cost her dearly. "I was afraid of what I did not understand," she said. "Your mind, your way of seeing things. I thought if I pushed you down, I would feel safer." Claraara listened without speaking. At last she bent, picked up a warm boiled potato from the pot by the fire, and held it out. Agnes took it with trembling hands. Now it was not forgiveness all at once. It was something quieter and more honest. The first small bridge over deep water. Years passed after that flood. The settlement rebuilt, but not on the same foolish ground. This time the houses rose higher, with stronger foundations and better drainage, many of them shaped by Claraara's advice. People listened now when she spoke about water, wind, and stone. The hidden cave behind the waterfall became known to all, not as a strange hiding place, but as a refuge and storehouse for hard times. Claraara and Maeve never left it. It remained their home. Children from the settlement came there to learn. Claraara taught them letters, yes, but also how to read the land, how to watch the flow of water, how to build things that lasted, and how to survive without losing kindness. Maeve, older and softer in her later years, sat near the doorway and smiled as their voices filled the cave. What had begun as exile had become purpose. What had started with a slammed door, a rain-soaked road, and one burlap sack had turned into a life no one could have imagined. And when people looked at the waterfall and the hidden cabin within it, they no longer saw a cast-out girl. They saw the woman who had built shelter from stone, fed the people who had once abandoned her, and proved that true strength was not in what a person could keep, but in what they could still choose to give.